Hi there, future Deltarune cutting in here just before we get started. This is the second part of our conversation that massively overran and we decided to split into two separate episodes. So there's no real intro to this, we just kind of get going and it basically follows directly on from part one, which should already be out. So if you haven't listened to that yet, I would definitely check that out first. But yeah, here we go with the second part of our Game of the Year 2021 discussions.
Okay, so after a break, I'm going to talk about a game that I know that you haven't played, but I have, so I need to talk about this because we've not even talked about it on the podcast either, and that's Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker.
I was wondering if that was... Yeah, okay, yes. Totally.
It's, yeah, I will try and not take up a lot of time talking about this because there is a lot to say about it, but it is definitely the crowning and culmination of what that game is and what has happened to that game. So for like a game that went from 14 when it initially came out and was slated and was horrible and they took it down and had to like redesign the whole thing, from A Realm Reborn to now, which is like 10 years or something like that, I think.
At least, yeah.
I need to double check that. When did A Realm Reborn come out?
I'll check it.
13? Okay, yeah. So almost 10 years. 4 expansions. This is the 5th expansion. The multiple like storylines and like characters and stuff like that all coming together into Endwalker that they pull off so successfully that it is like they go from like it being this like the Final Fantasy level of like it's your small group of people like trying to save the world against this giant like mythical entity to like Marvel Avengers Endgame level stuff where it is like there's a whole big cutscene in that game that is literally just, hey, do you remember all these people? Look at all these people coming to help you. And it is so effective because it's not the endgame thing where it's like, look at all these portals and all of these like distinct shapes coming out of them and being like, oh, I know what that is and all that stuff. It is like real tangible things that you have done storylines with, like side stories and like other things that you've done with people that then they're coming to you in this like final moment of the game, and it is a lot more effective. It is so effective when it is like, remember like the pirates from like the Dunscaith storyline and all the people from Boja and like all these things that you spent hours doing that now have this like tangible thing. It's so powerful. Like that cutscene just made me sit and spell the entire time. It's unbelievable. But then it is like you spend moments of that game doing stuff like going to like Garlemald, which is like the seat of the Empire power, the like the bad guys, and seeing that in like ruin for like various reasons. But like, so you get this real human story of like you going to your enemy and being like, we want to help you, you're suffering, and then being like, yeah, but we don't trust you. There's so many like good stories that are being told in this epic final moment that leads to you getting to the last. The story goes so fucking crazy to where like you get to the last area of that game in a spaceship built by like an ancient like a fucking like ancient race of people, or like helped by an ancient race of people, piloted by like bunny people that were put there by your ancient god. And there's so many like facets that sit and go, but it ends with you getting on a fucking spaceship powered by the raw essences of all the bosses that you've been killing over 4 expansions to get to the edge of the universe for you to be able to fight the embodiment of cosmic sorrow. Like it is crazy. Like the story goes fucking wild, and it goes so Kingdom Hearts that it like you are like, I think you're talking about like, oh yeah, sorry, you go.
I think it's one of the crowning achievements of that game that as somebody who only experiences it via you, that you can tell me that is the general plot of that expansion, and I'm like, yeah. Okay, like, sure.
It's a game that starts with you going like, oh god, the end times are coming, we need to stop this, and ends with you going, the way that we stop this is by getting on this spaceship and going to the edge of the universe and killing this thing. But
the idea that the game,
wild, yeah.
Like, seeing that game when Realm Reborn came out, or what that game looked like, and you look at it as somebody who's not trained in this stuff and be like, okay, yeah, that looks like an MMO. That looks like a fucking Final Fantasy MMO. Sure, okay, fine. And then fast forward to 2021 and you're like, oh yeah, and also there's spaceships and stuff like that. Yeah. And you're like, I could see how that game would do a spaceship.
Sure. There are things that have happened in earlier parts of Final Fantasy XIV. Like there's a whole ancient race that are all like super high tech and stuff like that. And you like fight remnants of that. Like you fight robots and you fight animate things that would be impressive with like laser guns and stuff like that. But they never talk about like space travel, and they go from everybody being like, shit, we need to worry about Eorzea and like Aeriths, which is the planet, to very quickly being like, oh yeah, we could get on this spaceship and go to the edge of the universe, and it's like explained and it makes sense, and you're like, yeah, you're right. You just kind of go, yeah, sure, that would work. Yeah, totally. Like, why would you not do that?
But even visually, it seems consistent. Like, it doesn't feel like they've just crammed a bunch of new genres into this original thing. Like, it feels like a consistent part of that world where you're like, okay, yeah, that's a Final Fantasy 14 spaceship. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. Like, it just seems...
It's so crazy, and it ends so well. Like, it goes from, like, it does the, like, emotional whiplash thing of, like, it goes from, like, total tragic sadness to, like, amazing high emotion thing in that final fight, or the second to final fight. And it does it in, like, the most, like, fucking weird-ass Kingdom Hearts JRPG way, where it's, like, through the entirety of Endwalker, you're talking about people's, like, souls and, like, what it means to, like, have meaning and, like, family and, like, what the power of the heart and all that stuff, to, like, time traveling, which is, like, a Kingdom Hearts thing. You do that, you hit all the major points, and then, like, in the fight against the, like, ultimate cosmic horror, which isn't even the final fight of the game, you get saved by all of your friends praying and believing in you enough to create like a cosmic
Hearts
shield.
Ass thing.
Yeah, it's the most Kingdom Hearts ass shit, but it's so good. Like the when you fight that thing at first and you see that cutscene of like all the Scions back at home base like doing their prayer thing, it's unbelievably good. Like it gets you so excited, and yeah, it's brilliant. It's so cool. But like at like a base level stuff, like all the new dungeons are super well designed. The new trial fights are really, really good. I did both of the harder versions of both trial fights, and they are like it's staggering to me that 5 expansions in they can still keep coming up with really unique mechanics. But they do, and it is like stuff that like I am good at raiding. Like I've done it enough in my life where I am a solid raider, and I understand mechanics and stuff like that. So most stuff doesn't really faze me, where they explain stuff and I'm like, cool, I understand what that mechanic is, it's fine. There are mechanics in these new fights that make my brain hurt. And I was like, it's like my brain just didn't get it. Like it was just like, it's one fight where it's like you have crystals and you have light waves coming in, and when they touch the crystal, they explode. And you have to hide behind one of the other crystals in a specific way. Like, you kind of have to line of sight the crystal. And my brain just could not get it. Like, I was either standing too far out or I wasn't standing in the right place. I was like, it's weird that I can do this, having done all of the other stuff that I've done in Final Fantasy XIV, and still get tripped up by mechanics like this.
Sure.
Like, they are so good at designing stuff like that. Yeah, it's unreal. And then you get into like the new Raid series that came out like 2 weeks ago, which is like, so the Raid series are like devoid of the main story. They're their own like side story. Really, really cool, interesting sort of side story. And again, all the fights are like, there are unique mechanics, but it is like it's mechanics that you would be familiar with, but they present them in different ways.
Right,
where you're
right.
I no idea. Like, there are fights, the harder versions of these fights come out tomorrow at time of recording, and there is stuff in there that is like, the harder version of that is gonna fucking suck.
Yeah.
It is like the second fight in that raid series is like a big dragon thing with two heads, but the one of the heads is like independent of the other one, and it does this move where it cleaves the arena, so it hits one half of the arena, but the other head is facing an opposite direction, so it's doing it two at once, and each head is doing it in a different shape. So one is doing like a rectangle half of the arena, and the other is doing a cone. So you have two very specific parts where you can stand, and you have to be able to... It's unreal that you have to be able to like look at the boss, look at where the two things are heading, and being like, which one of the halves of these arena is safe, and which corner can I stand in?
Yeah.
Like, the positional stuff is normal in a raid, but they're taking it and twisting it in such a way that is like, yeah, I've never seen anything like that before. Like, that's interesting and new.
I think
it's crazy.
I think a big part as well of the story of this game has been, especially this year, has been like the non-game part of that game, right? Like the community stuff around it has also been super interesting, where they've been dealing with the WoW influx of people and how they're doubling down on and like making a lot of very commendable and correct decisions, where it's like saying to the WoW people, hey, this is a different game, you fucking play by our rules or you leave, like, is a very like, you would not expect, well, if you didn't know the history of that game, you would not expect them to do that. They would be like, yeah, we've got more people, sure, we'll make changes to make it easier for WoW people to get in, right?
The people behind, or like the community is different to like the designers, right? Like, designers have like they've designed their thing where they're like, this is how this game works, and people learn how to play that game. The things that the designers have done that eased it are like, when the servers and stuff were getting overpopulated, they were like, okay, we're gonna stop selling the game, we're gonna stop letting people make new characters while this influx gets moved through the system, and then open it back up again, which they had to do again at the end of the start of Endwalker, where it was like 2-hour queues or whatever to get logged in and stuff. That was like, okay, we're gonna stop people buying this thing, and we're gonna let, eventually this is all gonna smooth out, and then the game will start, and it has now. It's like, it's gotten to a flat rate at this point. So yeah, they're doing the right thing, and the community is doing what the Final Fantasy community does, which is like, the Final Fantasy community is still one of the best communities online. Like, they are infinitely willing to like help people and be kind, and like, they're not the World of Warcraft community, which is like, fuck everyone. Like, that's the kind of like the general WoW consensus is like, fuck this if you're bad. But Final Fantasy people are a lot more willing to be patient and teach people things and be kind and like let things happen. Which is a big thing that a lot of the WoW people like about 14, is that it's a completely different sort of environment as opposed to the WoW thing that's just all look at number and stuff like that. But yeah, Endwalker is just, it is a triumphant conclusion to a thing that has been building for several years. That it's unbelievably how well they pulled it off. Like, they hit it both with an amazing amount of skill, an amazing amount of willingness to just go absolutely crazy with it, because they know exactly how to handle it and have it make sense, while being a lot of like servicing the people that have played a lot of the game with all of like the special fan service moments of like, remember this. Totally. It is a fantastic conclusion to that specific arc of the game, and I don't know how they do it from here, because like a lot of the stuff that people were expecting happened in the like they expected like stuff to happen throughout Endwalker, and then in the last patch of Endwalker to be like the last fight to be the big bad god that we've been like chasing for 5 expansions, that is the harbinger of the apocalypse. But like, you just fight him. Like, he's the first trial. Like, he's not even he happens in like the first like 10 hours of the game, and the game's like 30 hours long. So like, I don't know what happens from here, but I'm excited to see it.
Oh, totally.
Like it is, yeah. It's an amazingly well pulled off thing. Like Endwalker is absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
And I'm so excited to just see where it goes. And like there's 2 more raid tiers to come out, and there's like a whole Alliance raid series to come out. There's still more content to come that is going to be interesting.
Yeah. Just watching it from the outside, it seems like a very unique thing, especially in this genre, to be where everyone is kind of on board to just have fun with it, as opposed to like the things you see with a lot of communities of this type, where it's just like even the stuff like around the Endwalker launch, like a chunk of my Twitter follows are also Final Fantasy 14 players, and I don't follow arseholes, so that probably explains a chunk of it, but a lot of it was like, hey, here's the like screenshots of like I'm 2000th in the queue to get in today, or like there was a tweet I saw a couple of days ago that was like, yeah, my game crashed and I'm now in a 1,000-person queue, but there wasn't like animus behind it. It was just like, oh well, like everyone's trying their best, you know.
Yeah, it is kind of annoying, but like the stuff to do with like the queue times and stuff like that, they did the developers did the best that they could do, which is just like they put out a statement being like, yeah, there's a lot of people playing, there's going to be queues, like we're trying our best, but this is something that you can't deal with. It's not like and they talked specifically being like, yeah, like getting server infrastructure these days is really hard because you can't buy stuff. So we're trying our best. Here's a list of like all the errors that you can get while logging in, and here's what it means, here's the source of the problem, and here's what it means for you. Because the one that you got the most was this 2002 error, which is just like a desync between you and the login server, where they were like, so a bunch of people were like, oh shit, I got 202'd and like all that stuff, but they came out with a statement being like, look, 202 is a very specific error. It's not your fault, and it's not our fault. It is just like a random like unsync between the server that means you get booted out. If you log back in within 2 minutes of you getting 202'd, you won't lose your place in the queue. It's fine. Just like,
nice. Okay.
They're very reassuring of being like, yes, you will move through this queue. It's fine. We'll move through the system. And yeah, there was not a lot of, there was upset. Like we were all upset about it because we couldn't play the game we wanted to play, but there was no malice. Like,
there's a massive difference between upset and like the kind of stuff you would see on a Reddit of WoW stuff, or even Destiny to extent as well, of just like animosity towards the people who made the thing. Like that just didn't seem to be there, which is excellent.
Even when they announced that the thing was getting delayed by 2 weeks, people were
totally upset. That was a key part of that.
Wasn't a lot of animosity. They were just like, we understand, like you want to make this as best as you can, and we want to play it at its best, so you guys take the time you need. It was annoying because like people had to like swap around days they got off, and like sometimes they couldn't do that, and like all that stuff, but there was no real malicious hatred for anybody that was making the game at that point.
Totally. It's such a nice thing to see, especially this year. Cool. Really am I counting right and you've got one more game, or
yes, but it's probably something that you've played as well and is maybe on your list, but I don't know.
Well, I've done my list. That was my 5.
Oh, your list is that? Wow. Okay, sure. Sure. Let's talk about Inscription.
So, Inscription not being on my list was something we're gonna have to talk about. But Inscription is. Yeah.
I can understand why it's not on your list, because I think I know what you're gonna say. Yeah. But Inscription absolutely blew me out the water. It was. I had no idea what the fuck that thing was, and when you were like, we're going to record this video, don't look at anything about this game, just sit down and play it and we'll record you playing it. Zero idea what to think of going in. Then when I got in it, I got it. Like, I got it instantly. And was like, okay, I know why you've made me do this. Like, I understand this now.
It was one of my favourite videos we did this year because
for sure.
It was a really great insight into watching someone who has played as many card games as you watch the thought process of like, here's what this means, and here's what this is, and this is from this game, this is from this game, and here's how we pull this stuff together. Which is why as that game progressed and I saw more of what that game actually was, you're like, oh, this is 100% your jam, like, as they just fuck with this game constantly.
When you look at that game initially in Act 1, it is a very, very well designed roguelike deck building game.
Yeah.
It's very clear that the people who made that game in Act 1 knew a lot about card games. They were taking a lot of mechanics from different things. Like I said in the video, like that life counter is like very similar to how mana works in the Digimon TCG. Yeah. It has the sacrifice sort of mechanic that how Yu-Gi-Oh works. Like it has the like outside the game items that you can use that are similar to like the sort of thing that you can pull off in what's that game called? I can't remember. The like other like online TCGs that have this sort of like thing, like outside mechanics that you can bring into the game.
Sure.
And it's very clear that the people playing that designed that game know card games and know deck builders and know the history of card games and where things came from and like what this means and like all that stuff. And they're taking like the card mechanics from Magic where it's like power and toughness and but they still do their own thing with it where it's like the lanes mechanic where you play the cards in the different lanes is not something that I saw it once. It was in the Elder Scrolls card game that had lanes, but it was like a specific thing.
Yeah.
But they never did it like that, which is a very unique thing. And I saw it and was like, that's a cool idea because it is like limiting board space, but then you're also like seeing what the other person's playing because you're playing against an AI, so you can react to what they're doing. Very, 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 very clever design of that specific part that then gets layered on top of it with this escape room style, weird, eerie interact with the cabin sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they do that very successfully where there is a lot of like hidden stuff where like I could talk to you about the stuff in the inscription and you were like, I didn't see that. Like I had no idea. Totally. Like the thing that when I bolted through that game and we were talking about Act 1 and you were like, I don't know how you ever beat Act 1. And I was like, the only way that I was able to do it is with the totem mechanic and getting the squirrel head out of the drawer. Yep. Because it meant that your free draw stuff has a lot more impact, which is usually the thing that propels you in a card game. It's all about tempo.
So
you were like, I've never seen a squirrel head. What are you talking about?
So it was that final cabinet, the final puzzle cabinet.
Yeah, it was the last drawer.
Yeah, and I was like, I couldn't, like my brain couldn't comprehend what needed to happen there, and I just looked up the thing and got it. I was like, oh, and as soon as I saw the squirrel head, I was like, oh fuck, this totally changes.
Yeah,
your entire.
It's the one. Yeah.
And I think the thing for me as well was because I was watching the Waypoint guys play through this as well as I was playing through it, and when they talked about it, their end of year thing was like, once they had realized that in order to beat that game, you need to stop playing the game, you need to just try and break the game. Like when that's the focus, and it was like, oh, that makes so much more sense because I would just be like, because I was still trying to adhere to the rules of and think within the box of the rules of the game and be like, okay, how the fuck do you get, and then when they're just like, no, you just make the wildest fucking cards you possibly, and like the idea of like the way I ended up beating that game was just like I had a couple of cards that were doing like twin attack 7s and you're just like, if you can get that card out there, you just stomp everything. And you're just like, and it is the way that a lot of people, especially if you're like a seasoned card game player, when you encounter a situation that is like you versus a computer, you're not playing against another human. You know that the people that design it don't have to balance it like an actual card game. So they can let you do broken shit because it doesn't matter. So the second that you realize that and you're like, oh right, the way you beat this is just by completely like making the most busted shit you possibly can. And that's what works. Like usually when I talk to people about it, like the way that people beat that game a lot of the time is like, oh yeah, I had like my entire deck was just flyers. Or like I had like 4 like triple attack things that had like 4 damage, so it's hitting for 16 a turn and stuff like that. And it's all how broken can you make this deck and how efficient can you make it to get to the busted stuff. Because the way I did it was
I had like a bunch of like triple attack things that all had a lot of attack, but I also had the squirrel totem that said I can sack a squirrel for 3 blood as opposed to 1.
I never ended up getting that, so yeah.
So you just like power out your really expensive, powerful shit really fast, and that meant that deck just won on turn 1, like nearly every game it played. Because it was just like, okay, turn 1, I'm going to play these 2-3 attack things, and then you're dead, and then that's it.
So I get something similar where...
doesn't sound fun, but in a single-player card game, that is the enjoyment of being like, how fucking busted can I make this? And that's what that is.
Which is wild that, like, that ethos, like, narratively works as well. Like, as you go further through that game, where, like, that whole game is about, like... fucking with the rules of the game, right? That is the whole point of that thing.
So that's So
like when you're doing so the reason why it didn't make it for me is like that act 1, like I almost stopped with that game, right? Because that act 1 thing was just like, that original game was like, it just felt unfair. Like the roguelike mechanic of it originally felt very... It was like, how... Because your deck keeps getting reset, you can't do the thing that you do with a traditional TCG, where you're like, okay, I've learned from hours of experience with this thing, I can now put together a deck that I know how to beat a bunch of things. Like, so much of it was just chance about what you're going to get and how you're going to get it. And it felt... And the further I got, where you're like, okay... Once I'd beaten, because the first big hurdle for me was like the fisherman, and like once you beat the fisherman and you're like, okay, right, I've got this now, I think I know what's happening, and then they throw the trapper boss at you, who's just like, oh fuck you, oh fuck you, like every stage of that just gets progressively more fuck you, and then the final thing where you're just like, it just felt insane. It just felt like, it felt so incredibly unfair, and especially in a mechanic where like a run of that game, we kind of end up with something like, which is one of the issues with something like Returnal, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which is like a run of that game is long in Act 1, to go from start to finish, and especially when you do stuff like the second or third phase of the Trapper, where like if you get a bad roll or he gets a good roll, like you don't really get a chance to do much before you're just wiped and start again. And like and you see it when you go to Act 3 of that game, where they make changes to the mechanics that directly stop that from happening, right? Where like, because they've got checkpoints in there, you're like, okay, if I fucked up that fight, you're not too far away from where you were before. And it was just like, that bit for me felt just like, it felt too punishing until you get to the point where you're like, okay, it wasn't so much about... Like, I thought the way to beat that thing was just pure understanding and like combination. Which like when you look at the video, when we did that video, the way you were talking about it was like, oh, I know this rule, I know how these two rules interact. Because traditionally those games are about like getting your deck to get a bunch of interactions between different cards in a way that is beneficial. So I was like, my brain can't comprehend all of these rules at once and I was sitting like looking at the thing, okay, I need to go here because I need to get a card that does this so that this will interact. And then once you realize, and I think it was the squirrel head moment, where you're like, oh, they just want you to just fucking break this. Like they want you to actively break the thing. That was the moment where I started actually making progress again and actually seeing stuff. And it was like Act 1 just felt a little too long for me.
It was I can totally understand that, because it is like it's a card game understanding thing. Like that is what totally. I totally get that. Like I don't begrudge anybody being like, I bounced off Act 1 or whatever. It's I don't know if I feel as strongly as I do because I'm a card game player, because it's like totally. So all the stuff that I'm talking about is all just Act 1, right? Like it's all
totally.
When you break out of Act 1, and that game like shows its hand to you, as opposed to like to show you what it is, like what that game actually is, which is like this weird narrative mystery game that has a like card game element behind it. It was so, because it went from people that like and we're like, oh yeah, you understand card games and you know what you're doing here, to being like, oh no, you're the Pony Island people. Like you're pulling the rug out from under people like at every given opportunity, which is exactly what they did.
Yes.
But at the same time, they're taking their understanding of card games and kind of like presenting it to you as a almost like a timeline style history of card games.
Yeah.
Where it is like you get out of Act 1 into Act 2 and it goes back to like base level of like, this is like Magic the Gathering, like Chandelier, like this is like that game where
there
it
are
has
4
like,
elements. There are
and it starts introducing those kind of mechanics where it's like there are tribes and there are card identities, being like meaning like if I have a tribe card, it has a unique mechanic that is unique to that thing. Mm-hmm. So if I have like a wizard card, the wizard cards deal with the colors of mana. Mm-hmm. But if I have a mechanical card, it deals with that like weird battery row thing.
Yeah.
So it has like color identity and stuff like that, which is a very Magic the Gathering thing. Mm-hmm. And it still has the sacrifice mechanic and it's dealing with mana, but it has this like color identity thing. But then it progresses from that, and throughout the entire thing you're getting these little like hints to the wider story that are like everywhere and like hidden in little bits. And so you go through that, and then you get to Act 3 where it takes a step again and starts presenting card games like card games are now, where it is online style TCGs, where it is like you are gaining like mana and stuff has been smoothed out. You're like gaining mana a turn. You can like, you have unique mechanics that deal with it more like it being a video game. So you get stuff in the third act that's like the sniper bot that can hit any lane at once.
Right. Yep.
Where it's like that sort of mechanic really only works when you're doing it as a game, because you have to like point it at a specific lane and stuff. It is doing this like slow walk through card games as they progressively go through history, and it is absolutely fascinating to see how they take those ideas and develop them over the courses of the acts to mirror what's going on in the game. It's just such a cool little moment of like, it's more than Act 1 for them to be able to show that they understand card games, and it's so great to sit and see. And then you get to the fourth act, which is like mental, where
God.
And it's not even, the fourth act isn't even that long, but it is like the best thing, and it is the thing that made people that like the card game players that I know go crazy the most, where they present like quote unquote the future of what card games are, and it's fucking Yu-Gi-Oh! It's the dual disc, it's the holographic characters, it's the dual disc, it's like the arena with everything around it, and you're like, in like maybe 10 years you could get to card games looking like that, where it's like physical but everything's AR, and it's
when that guy popped a dual disc,
and
it popped
and
out,
they just fucking call it a dual disc.
They
don't
say
it's a dual disc.
And
it's
like
I went insane at that point. It was so clever. That was the moment that clicked for me, being like, no, they're showing you how card games are progressing throughout history. Like, it is this through line thing. And they got to that, and I was like, that of course, like, that is, of course, what they think the future of card games is. Of course it's Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is such fucking futuristic bullshit that they might as well. Like, it could only have been better if they went proper Yu-Gi-Oh! With it, and everybody was, like, on a motorbike. Like, that was... Like, they could have went that way, but no, they did it in the clever way, which is, like, almost tangible, which is, like, oh, yeah, you'll get to, like, card games where it's all holographic and stuff like that eventually. Like, that's... And it's a game... It's so smart. The game does everything so well. It's such a well-designed... Like, the thing that excites me the most is I saw a thing from the developers that was, like, they're promoting this mod for it, which is... It's a game that when you... The mod says that when you get to the end of the game, you can then just start playing Act 1 again as a roguelike with a progressive difficulty and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, that's the one thing that I would have said against this game, where it was like... When I finished it, all I wanted to do was go back and keep playing Act 1 stuff again. Like, which is not... I'm not denigrating Act 2 and 3 for that. I think Act 2 and 3 are great. They're really cool and unique. They maybe drag on a bit, but they are cool and unique, and they serve a purpose, especially when you're telling the story of that Luke Carter guy.
Yes.
Like, the super hidden stuff that's in there. useful for that, but what I wanted to be able to is like, yeah, but I kind of want the roguelike back, like I want the Act 1 stuff back, and they're doing that. They're promoting this mod that is getting made, which is fantastic, which then means that game is just like really tie that thing off with a bow.
Yeah. It's also like, even just technically, like, this is so that like between like the progression from Pony Island to the Hex to this, like those games have always been like, it's like because of the way that game looks, it'd be very easy to underestimate the amount of work that's gone into building that thing, right?
No,
because
totally, yeah.
because not only because like especially with stuff like Pony Island is essentially like a bunch of mini games, and you're like, okay, like we've seen stuff like that before, it's fine. And then with the Hex, it's like it's like 4 or 5 larger games, but they're still all 2D and they're very kind of like traditional stuff. Like they built essentially like 4 separate card games and like 4 like 2.5 to 3 different like interaction stuff between Act 1 and Act 3, and then like built a whole 2D section for Act 2, and then on top of all of that, like you've got to build a card game that works like a card game, that is like balanced and doesn't have like that.
Well, it doesn't need to strictly be balanced.
Well, no, but it needs to behave, right? It needs to behave.
It needs to not break instantly. Which
exactly.
Which is that.
And all these mechanics that all work together, and like building, like as somebody who went through the logistical steps of like, okay, how would I build a card game, like a digital card game, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, once you start mapping out how you would actually go about doing this, like it's fucking wild that any of these things come out when you're dealing with
totally,
like,
it's
especially when you've got something like, because I mean we've had conversations before about the Magic digital version of Magic, right? Where you're like, they're having to encode rules that of a real card game that you can that you can deal with as a human being, right? Like two people who are there can look at the rules and go, here's how this plays out, and then you have to encode that in code, and you're like, that is a wild thing.
The thing specifically about Magic is that like it's better when it's online, because Magic has so many rules that go so many layers deep that it is sometimes hard to figure out as a human.
Yes,
being
totally.
like, if I do this while this is here, what's the actual interaction?
Yeah,
the game just does it. So yeah, it's really, really hard to code a card game with specific interactions that bounce off each other. Like that's been well known. Yeah, and in terms of like the act structure, like because of my experience with Act 1, I'm like Act 2 and 3. Like I didn't really have any trouble getting through them. Like they're not designed because they are way easier than Act 1 is.
Yeah, and they've done the thing they wanted to do with Act 1, which is like, here's a real ass card game that you have to try and break. Like they very smartly went, okay, you've solved that problem, we're now giving you other stuff here, because like, if Act
we're now giving you like story beats and like hidden mystery stuff that's all around.
If Act 3 had been the same kind of difficulty level as Act 1, like I probably wouldn't have finished that game, but like they make enough changes to be like, we want you to see more of this. And again, like watching the Waypoint guys go through it, like there's a bunch of stuff in 2 and 3 that I just didn't fucking see. Like I didn't see a lot of story stuff in there that I actually need to go back and read a lot of the extra story stuff in there, because I didn't see it, because I wanted to get through and see the stuff they were actually showing me, and I got enough out of that I wasn't disappointed. It was like, oh, they've hidden a lot of stuff in here.
Oh yeah, there's so much hidden stuff in that game that
it is a hell of an achievement, and it
and
really
they're supplementing it with this like ARG thing that has
the ARG I need to go read up on as well. I haven't even seen that stuff.
That takes the stuff that you can find in the hidden game and spins it out and like gives you the background and stuff like that. It's unbelievable what they managed to pull off in that thing. Like it is so and do it so well. Like Inscription really blew me away. Like
for a game that had exactly one trailer that was showing it like an E3 or something like that, which was like, and it's just the Act 1 stuff, and it's like, oh cool, the Pony Island people are making a card game, that's going to be interesting, and that was it. And then just hearing people go doing the thing that I love in this medium, where you just have people putting it in front of you and going like, you should just play this, and just walking away.
It was I messaged you being like, nah, there's more to this. Like you need to keep going with this. Like it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, like once you get past Act 1 and you see all the stuff that's in 2 and 3 and then the ending and stuff like that, it's like,
Yeah.
it's unreal.
It's wild.
It's so good. Yeah.
Was that your last? I only have 4 games written down
that's
for
it.
you.
That's it.
What was it? It was Endwalker, Death's Door, Monster Hunter, Inscription.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about. We can talk very quickly about this because we talked about it a lot in the podcast and stuff like that. But Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
Oh sure, yes,
one.
yeah.
Again, don't need to talk about it a lot. You can go and listen to the podcast and stuff like that. But that game is just a really good video game. Like it is totally. It's not trying to be anything other than a good video game. It's a game that like plays really well, looks fantastic, uses the PlayStation 5 motion thing, the rumble, I can never remember what it's called, but does that in really cool ways that like help your immersion. Some brilliant moments in that, like specifically you wrote down the fixer fight. Yeah, the fixer rail thing. So like the bit at the end of the Monolith Gulch where the ancient robot wakes up and starts breaking all of the mines.
Yes. And
you're like doing the skating thing across the mines, but the robot is like breaking stuff in front of you, so your road is changing at all times, and it's this amazing like one massive robot that is interacting with this huge map, and it's like there as far as I could tell, there's like not a lot of like tricks or anything like that. It's just doing it, and the game handles it, and there's like no hitching, and it was so impressive to see what they managed to pull off with that.
We've seen that particular sequence in other games of this type. In fact, in other Ratchet and Clank games of this type, where it's like the long rail ride stuff. But like, the amount of fidelity and the stuff that they can do, it's always the thing that was going to be interesting with this generation. Is like they've raised the head on. They've given people a lot more room to work with, right? Especially when you're dealing with like the SSD speed for loading. They basically just, it's not about like sheer power, even though those machines are really, really powerful. It is about giving developers space to work that we'd start to put limits on.
When you heard devs talk about developing stuff for like, especially like PS3 and PS4 and stuff like that, I seem to hear a lot more, but it was like, no, we're hitting the physical limitation of this machine.
Yes.
Like we know we can't do more than what we're trying. So them, with the new machine being given this a lot more space, especially with like SSDs and stuff like that, where they can get fast loading times and stuff, gives them more space to do really massive grand scale stuff like this.
Like one of the big reveals as well. Like when both consoles came out, were announced, and it was like, the big thing we're doing is like SSDs to eliminate loading. Like they both said that, and you're like, initially the initial reaction is like, that seems like a weird thing for them to like double and triple down on and come out the gate. Like storage is like the least sexy thing they could be talking about, right? But then once you get into Ratchet and Clank, or a game like Ratchet and Clank, where you realize that like there was a conversation that when the PS5 got announced, there was one of the technical conversations they had was about the new Spider-Man, the Miles Morales Spider-Man game. I'd watched the GDC talk from one of the guys who did one of the developers on the first Spider-Man game, the PS4 one. That was like so much work has to go into that to make that thing, one, fit on a disc, and two, like stream out the assets in the right way that makes it feel like that's one gigantic city that's always running. And
for sure.
Like a lot of that gets solved or is made easier like by stuff like the PS5. And when you see the Ratchet and Clank stuff, when I restarted Ratchet and Clank to get the last couple of achievements in that game, last couple of trophies in that game, there was a moment I realized exactly what was happening, where like the opening section with the fair procession thing with all the balloons. When you start falling through the portals to all these different worlds, like when you first start that game, you're like, oh, this is a cool trick that they're doing, but they're loading in different little chunks of this level or of these things to do. That's really, really cool. There's a section later in that game, I think it's a boss fight, where you do something similar where you fall through a bunch of portals. The thing that really triggered for me was when you fall through one of the portals and the UI on my screen triggered like a objective marker, like, hey, here's this objective you haven't done yet.
This thing that you need to do on this planet.
And you're like, oh, they're actually loading in chunks of this other thing, like, which is such a minor thing, and like in terms of gameplay is like, it's actually probably a bug, but like it showed the the underpinnings of this whole thing was like they're fucking doing the thing that previous generations have had to smoke and mirror so hard to get to even vaguely work. They're just able to do it now, and it's so interesting. And the advantage is that you don't need. Well, that's not true. Like, fucking games are still horrendously difficult to make, but if you can do stuff like that, it means that the higher end or the stuff that you would normally need to be like a first party Sony studio to be able to pull off is now within grasps of smaller studios, right? Where like if you don't need to worry about the same kind of level of like hard streaming tech that is very, very difficult, if you can just load the thing and it works, it means we might see more complicated games coming from smaller studios, which is just excellent, right? That's
you get to see the people that the smaller teams that get a lot more creatively ambitious, with more power,
because you don't need to worry about
such a fascinating idea.
Like the idea that like more people could do Bethesda style games is just is a really cool idea.
I'm sure.
What
happens in that sort of game when you load the whole world all at once? Like, how does that...
Or large chunks of it.
Or like, large chunks of it. Like,
because like the closest thing you got was like when you listen to watch the no-clip doc for Outer Wilds, which is like, in order for that game to physically exist and do the things that it does, they need to be running all 6 of those planets at all times. The nightmare that must have been. It lets you do stuff like that better. And even the small stuff, like technically in that game, like one of the things I wrote down was like when you get onto the first or the second planet, and you're like, hey, you need to go to the nightclub, and how do you find the nightclub when there's no signposting? Like the bass from the nightclub is coming through the controller vibration,
you can feel the bass,
and you can feel it directionally. And that was that moment where I was just like, this is fucking that. Yeah, it was just wild seeing that happen.
It's both incredibly accurate and incredibly reductive, which I've heard people say that it's like Ratchet and Clank is like the best tech demo for the stuff the PS5 can do really well.
But it is
but it totally is, but it is very reductive because it's an amazing game in its own right.
Yep.
But it's so good at showing off the stuff that the PS5 can do.
Yes,
and it is. Yeah, it's really, and at the end of the day, it's just really fun.
Yes,
like,
it's also a really fun
video game to just sit and play. Yeah. And it's like really well acted, and it looks great, and the writing's really like endearing and snappy and funny, and like it has heart and stuff. Like it is way more than just, hey, we put a Ratchet and Clank game on the PS5. Like it's so much more than that, and it's great.
It's weirdly enough is a thing I saw from a couple of games this year, like this and Resident Evil. Actually, it was like, I like seeing more games coming out that it feels like the developers want you to actually finish it. Like it feels like they want you to see, because like that's the first game in a long time I've platinumed. Like all the trophies are like gettable, and especially when you finish that game and you do enough of the exploration stuff where you're like, hey, how about unlimited ammo? And you're like, oh, because it would be very easy for you to make it where like once you get the unlimited ammo perk, for it to disable trophies. Like that seems like a thing that you've seen before, where you're like, you can only get this trophy if you're not doing New Game Plus or whatever it is. But they're like, no, like, hey, get the trophies. Who fucking cares? Like, it does not matter. Like trophies don't mean anything anyway. Just go do the thing. And especially in another year where the fucking difficulty discourse kept coming up again, it felt like this was the year. This was definitely the year where the majority of people were like, who fucking cares? Like, it does not matter. Like, let people do the
do what they want.
Do what they want with games. Like, we haven't talked about Guardians of the Galaxy yet because it's a weird thing to bring in here, but like when you start that game, it's got like a easy, medium, hard style. They're not called easy, medium, hard, but that's basically what they are. And then once you select one of them, it takes you to a second page, which is like, here's a whole bunch of settings, like of like really detailed settings. Like you can just turn all of these off or on, or turn stuff up and turn stuff down. Like you can play that game however you want to play that game. Like and that's what it should be like, right? Like
absolutely.
I started XCOM 2 again over Christmas and was like, cool. Every time I start that game now, I turn on like longer mission timers and longer advent timers, and everything else stays off. And you're like, because that's the way I have fun in that game, right? Because that game is super punishing with those two regards, but it's like, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here for this bit, I'm here for the rest of it. So I can turn that up and it's fine. Like, who the fuck cares if I make that
who
bit?
cares, yeah.
Right. It's yeah. So yeah, having Ratchet and Clank be a game that feels like it wants you to finish is super interesting. Right. It's great. Cool. So that was our games. There's a
I was
couple
gonna say if you want to move on, before we move on to like news or anything like that, do you have any like honorable mentions that you just want to like quickly shout out?
Kind of, yeah. Like I feel like I started Guardians like 3 days ago before we started recording this, and I feel like the further it goes into it, the more it would have appeared more in these categories had I got to it earlier. But that game is super cool. That game is a Telltale game with totally competent combat, and it's just super good. It's way, way better than it has any right to be as a Marvel tie-in game from the Deus Ex studio. Like
Deus Ex people, yeah.
Oh, it's fucking wild.
It's yeah. I fully intend on playing that game once you're done with it.
You should.
I will probably get a lot of it being like a comic book nerd. So
totally.
Be able to like see stuff, but
there's
it's
a lot of
super cool and interesting. Everybody that I've seen playing it has always been like, yeah, this thing's like way better than that I thought it was going to be. Like it's
and like there was a character appeared last night as we were playing it. We're like, wait, they're in this, and they're like a central. Oh, okay, and it's super, super good. I'm just looking through my other list of games that was here. Overboard is a really good, like, if you want a cool 3-hour murder mystery on a boat.
Murder mystery game, yeah.
Super good. Again, one of the moments I wrote down here is like, so it's a murder mystery on a boat that is done purely, and again, another time loop game for this year. You have to basically, you've murdered someone and you have to get away with the murder by the time you dock in New York. And one of the things you can do very quickly is like, once you've looped a couple of times and you're like, okay, you figured out what's going on here, you just jump off the ship, and they've written a whole bunch of dialogue for like, yeah, she jumped off the ship and killed herself, and you're like, that was weird, I wonder what happened. And then they find like they've not only thought about that, the fact that they've known that people are going to do it is super cool. I also say the Forgotten City is really good. It wasn't enough to make it into my 5, but the Forgotten City is such an interesting thing, which is that's the game that's like it was a Skyrim mod and then blown out into a full game. I'll specifically say, like, because there's a lot of really good bits of that thing, but the one that made me fucking laugh out loud, there's a final reveal in that game. So there's like multiple endings to that game. There's a consistent, as far as I can tell, there's like a consistent moment in every ending where, so that game starts with you waking up next to a river with this woman who who's woken you up. It's like, hey, I fished you out the river, like, are you alright? And she introduces herself and it's like, hey, yeah, my name's Karen, don't make the joke, blah 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 blah. Like, all of that kind of stuff is there. It's like, hey, your friend ran off to the ruins. You don't have any memory of any of this, but you're like, oh, okay. You run off into the ruin and do the whole rest of the game. Once you finish the game and come back, she's still there. And you're like, wait, how long have I been gone for? And she's like, oh, you've been gone for like 4 days or whatever it is in real time or whatever it is. And it's like, but wait, you knew about all this stuff that was happening? Like, who the fuck are you? And you have this conversation and her... You start to figure something out, and then her eyes go red, and you're like, oh, no, I'm Karen, Charon, who is taking you on the river to the afterlife. And it was just this fucking mind-blowing, like, wait, not only did you make the Karen joke at the start, you've taken the Karen joke and done a better thing with the Karen joke. It was
a better bait and twist.
It was so good. Like, Charon, fantastic. And it was right there, like, staring in the face the whole time. It just didn't click. But yeah, Forgotten City is, I think that's also on Game Pass. It's well worth like a run through of that thing to see what they've done. I think that was everything else I had on here.
I'll very quick shout outs. Operation Tango, that
oh god, yeah, right, yeah,
co-op game we played. really, really fun.
Yep.
Really silly, but it does co-op stuff really well, and
Yep.
it's cool that you've got this like asynchronous co-op thing. I really enjoyed that. We do need to go and play the DLC for that.
Yes, we need
really,
to go play.
really cool.
Yep, for sure.
Special shout out to Knockout City. I played way more of Knockout City than I should have done. The game it's actually legitimately really fun. It's that really crazy dodgeball game from EA.
Yep.
Has a really like silly cartoony look. Has an amazing soundtrack for like no reason, and is mechanically actually quite dense and interesting. Yeah, I played so much Knockout City when I didn't intend to, so special shout out to Knockout City because
Sure.
Christ, that game. Guilty Gear Strive. I didn't play as much Strive as I meant to, but God, that game. If we were actually doing categories and we were talking about best looking, there is no way that any other game could compete with that thing.
Spectacular. Yeah.
Because it looks unbelievably good, and the soundtrack is just like so mid 2000s wrestling that it hits that part of my brain so well. It's all crazy overdriven guitars and dumb lyrics, and it's brilliant. I love the everything that's trying, and like watching it is really fun. It's a really good game to sit and watch.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, really cool.
I watched a good few bits of Strive this year and it's just like, man, this thing is...
Last one is Boomerang X. Didn't quite make it. I was so close. That game is like, it's everything I love about people who design really good movement in video games.
Yep.
Where it's super precise and really reactive to what you're doing, and it's really fun to just sit and fly through levels, but you still feel like you have a lot of control.
Yeah.
Like it's so good. Boomerang X is just so much fun to just sit and play through, and it's got a really unique style, and there's like a cool story I didn't expect under it. It's really, really, really great little thing. But yeah, that's really quick shout outs I had to have for some stuff.
The last two I'll also mention, Signal State, which is like the most you-and-ass game on this list, but is like, hey, what if we took a Zachtronics game and made it a modular synthesizer? Really good little concise puzzle game.
I watched someone play that for like an hour and was like, there's no way Ewan isn't already over this, and I messaged you and you were like, oh yeah, I've got it downloaded. So
I mean, one of the reasons, I'd played the demo back during one of the Steam demo festivals and was like, I need to pay attention to this is cool. The only thing, like, it didn't make it my list, like, for a couple of reasons, but like one of the main ones is like some of the later stages on that thing were like actually broken. Like some of the modules didn't work the way they were documented they were supposed to have worked, so it made solving those puzzles kind of like not great. But that game's very cool. And also just like, because I think it got overlooked a lot this year, What the Dub has been a real savior for a bunch of me and my friends this year. Like, it is a spectacular spin on the Jackbox formula, which is just like, it's such a smart idea. It's kind of shocking nobody had come up with it before, because you've got all of this.
Is that the thing that uses like the royalty-free movie thing?
Yeah, like the old black and white C movies, and then you fill in the gaps in the dialogue. Like, it's so much fun. It is consistently funny. It does the right amount of like helping, because it is a, like, I think a bunch of us are very lucky that like we can write funny and it kind of works. But I know a lot of people who are not as good at that, right? So like Jackbox does the thing. It's like, hey, if you actually can't think of anything, hit this button and we'll generate stuff for you. Like, What the Dub feels, it helps you. I mean, there's no mechanic for helping you, but the way that it's put together does mean that you can write a bunch of stuff, and even if it's not funny on its own, the way it gets integrated into the footage, and the fact that you get sound effects, and the fact that it's text to speech that works and can swear, like you can definitely participate more than like if you have a bad round of Jackbox. Just What the Dub, we played a lot of that this year when we couldn't do D&D with my D&D group, and it's just so good. It's just such a good thing. And like, of course, they patched it like a month ago and added like 100 new clips and stuff like that into it. Like they're continuing to support it as well. It's super good. Cool. Yeah. So we'll take one more break and then we'll wrap this up with probably some music, some stuff that was actually super disappointing, and we'll leave it there, probably.
Yep.
Cool. Back in a second. Okay, let's get back into the last part of our discussion. One of the reasons for me that I think I wanted to do like our non-traditional discussion was that actually like my most disappointing list was larger than it's ever been before. This year there was a lot of stuff that I'd been looking forward to that just didn't pan out for whatever reason. So like the biggest one for me was the Medium. Really I was so sad at that thing. Like a game that came from Bloober Team, a game like with some pedigree in the genre, with who had got Akira Yamaoka to sign on for the music, which was the closest thing we'd seen to somebody going, fuck it, let's make our own Silent Hill, and just totally missing the mark. Like,
yeah,
it's not only does it not really understand what makes Silent Hill, like the stuff they added to it, like the chase sequences in that game are fucking terrible. Like the story just doesn't. The story's kind of incomprehensible. Well, it's not incomprehensible. It's like both too simple and like not simple enough at the same time. Where like the last like couple hours of that game are just like a bunch of stuff happens and you're like, okay, like was this supposed to be a bigger deal than it actually was, and all that kind of stuff. It sucked. It made me so sad. And then especially like because at the end of the year there's a project I've been following for a while called Post Trauma put out their demo, or like their kind of like teaser thing of like, here's the kind of thing we're going for, and they have fucking nailed Silent Hill. Like they've got it. Yeah. Like they've done the thing, both in tone and look and just atmosphere. It's like it is doable. I think that's the thing. Like my worry was going to be that like we're just never going to see one of those games again, because like that team could make those games. I was like, no, you can do it. You just really need to understand.
So doing a Silent Hill game is difficult because you really need to understand what made Silent Hill work, and there's a lot to that.
And a lot of the problems with it actually came from like the arc of how horror games have gone, where like you look at like I think that the change for me was kind of like when Amnesia came out, because Amnesia came out around the same time as like when Twitch streaming started getting like Amnesia Amnesia was one of the first games that like you would see Twitch streamers or YouTubers put on to get like the screen reaction shots and stuff like that. Yeah. And you're like, once people start seeing that, and like a lot of games got big because Twitch streamers like PewDiePie would be playing it or whatever it is, and like it made sense for you to make game. Like I don't begrudge anyone making those games, right? Because like it's a good way to get your game out there if it's a game that lends itself to that genre of stuff. But that's not that's not what Silent Hill has ever been, right? Silent Hill's the reason I love that game so much in a genre that I don't like playing a lot of other games in is because it's not jump scares. It's not that kind of thing. It's this psychological dread thing that really that I react much better to than just like shitty jump scares. And the Medium just didn't do that. Like it was kind of gross and kind of a little bit like, yeah, that's a bit creepy, sure, and like, but you're doing like, hey, you're doing like ghost girl who pushes toys around in weird ways, and you're like, okay, fine. And then you're being chased by a giant monster, which looks cool, but like Silent Hill doesn't have chase sequences like failable, repeatable chase sequences, like fail state chase sequences, and you're like, what the no. And then you get something like Post Trauma, which is like, no, this is just like thick layer of dread throughout this whole thing, and it knows when to be quiet, it knows when to have distance, it knows when to just like fucking make you uncomfortable in like the best possible ways. It was just like, it can be done. You just need to really understand it, and the Medium just missed it so wildly. Cruelty Squad was another one which felt like it was going to be like designed for me, and just I couldn't. Cruelty Squad's that like horrendous looking shooter, which is like theoretically has some stealth mechanics, but is mainly just like a shooter that is just like weird and gross and doesn't look right and sounds terrible, and it's like I get what they're going for aesthetically. Like, I understand the aesthetics, I appreciate the aesthetics, but like the game part of it is just not good. And like you need to, for that type of game, you need to either have both of those things fucking nailed or choose one or the other. And this tried to do it all and just didn't get it.
And
I kept seeing people that I like follow and take recommendations from on the internet going like, oh, Cruelty Squad's fucking amazing. I'm like, I just don't. It's just not fun to play, and it doesn't do enough of the aesthetic stuff to, like, especially in a year where I played Broken Reality, which is like not much of a game, but is all aesthetic and design and atmosphere. There's like, it fucking nails all of that, and that's great. And it doesn't need to have the game part of it. Cruelty Squad tried to also be a game, and it just fucking failed for me. Well, so Recompile was another one that was just kind of personally really sad, because it's a game I'd followed for a long time. It was like one of the first games that I actively followed on Twitter like a long time ago, to be like, this thing looks awesome, and I'm specifically following this Twitter account to see it progress and continuing to see it progress over the years. It was super cool, and like followed the developer, or like the lead developer, and like he seems like a super cool guy and obviously has a great love for the thing he does. But then the thing came out, it was just like, it's just not, it doesn't do enough in the genre it's trying to be. It doesn't give you, I mean, we talked about it in the podcast, I'm not going to go through it again, but like, if you're going to make like a Metroidvania style game, you need to have a map that works, or else that thing is just frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just doesn't have a map that works.
For sure.
It's like, and it wasn't, it was, listen to the episode where we talk about that to hear my problems with it, but it was like, it was just really disappointing. 12 minutes wasn't disappointing, it was just fucking bad. I think it was just,
I don't know, right? 12 minutes was at least, 12 minutes had a lot of potential to be interesting, where it was like, it was a cool idea, it had really famous actors behind it, like it theoretically could have worked.
Like the closest thing we've ever had to like a one set play in video games, right? Where it's like a super constrained
like
environment.
A really small narrative game with like an interesting idea and like famous actors and stuff. You're like, it's great. But then like all of it falls apart. Like the second you try and interact with it, where like the game doesn't play well, the voice acting's not particularly that good.
Yep.
And the story's fucking insane to the point of being actually like, not offensive, but like,
but fucked up. Like that is
fucked up in a pretty bad way.
Yeah.
It's just it was disappointing to go to a thing that was like, we saw it on E3s like multiple times, being like, man, that game could be really cool. Like I really like the idea behind that. To it falling on its face so dramatically is it was crazy. Yeah,
that thing is again like real sales pitch for Game Pass, where I was like, this is bad, but I'm gonna see it
Didn't
through.
Pay for it, so yeah.
Just to
but like, it also shows that like, it's not. I don't know what happened, but it's not the fact that like, oh yeah, it's famous actors doing a video game, so it's bad. Like Artful Escape has like famous people in it and is done amazingly well. It was I just don't know how they managed to get like James McAvoy, Daisy Ridley and stuff like that, and get them to be that flat. Like, it's just not well acted. It's unbelievable.
And I mean, also as well, like, it was, the other reason I'm excited about it was, like, once I had read, like, oh, it's like a traditional ass point and click game. Like, I fucking love a good traditional point and click game. But they have not seen what point and click games have become since Monkey Island, right? Where, like, every game, like all of the Wadget Eye games and stuff like that, like I've taken the genre and taken it to like have improved it to the point where it has a lot of the ethos of those old games, but makes it playable, or makes like design decisions that let you actually do interesting stuff with that format. 12 minutes has like, there is no hint system. The time loop mechanic makes you actively play through the same shit again with no like no skipping, really.
Yeah.
You don't get like, it doesn't even let you like it doesn't let you experiment in any way, because if you because the timer is always running, you can't experiment in the same way you would with a game like that, where you're going to try a bunch of stuff and see what works. Like, you get to try a couple of things. It's like, cool, now we're going to punish you by making you watch the same 2 minutes again. I just like, it feels like they came to the point where they're like, what is the game part of this story that we've written? Cool, let's make it a point and click game, rather than going like, let's make a cool point and click game. It was so wild. Road 96 wasn't disappointing. It was a cool thing that it did. It's just like, parts of it felt like the core idea overtook what it could be, where the whole sales pitch was like, hey, it's a procedural narrative game, but like, which is a cool idea, but once you actually try and implement a procedural narrative game, you're like, well, there are things that have to be done because it's procedural that actively affect the fact it's a narrative game. Where like, because stuff can be in any order, you're like, okay, this is the point in the conversation with these people where you're like, you can ask a bunch of questions to know more about their character. And it's like, it's the same lead up every time, and because you don't know when you could have met them and what you could have seen, there are multiple situations in there during my playthrough. It was like, you shouldn't know that. There's no way you should know that based on this thing. And then when you actually get through it and the overarching story finishes, and you're like, the whole, like, exactly the thing that it says is leading up to happens, and you're like, cool, so how does that affect all the characters? And it's like, credits. And you're like, oh, it just ends.
It just doesn't.
Oh, okay. And you don't even have to have seen all of the characters' other characters' full stories to get the ending. So it's like, okay, you're done. I'm like, really? Can I go back and see more of that stuff? I was like, yes, if you start the game again. You're like, nope, I'm good, thank you. It was just like, it had a lot of potential that felt like it needed more work and more thought to be able to really capitalize on. So it was a little bit disappointing like that. Okay, here's a question. Is Deathloop worth talking about here? Because
disappointing?
Maybe disappointing is the wrong term. I have not finished that game, and don't have a lot of compulsion to go back and play it more, and I'm surprised by that. Like, that felt like a game that we would have like inhaled, and it just didn't. It just stopped. I don't quite know why. Is the thing?
Yeah, this is why it felt weird to talk about, because like I actively do want to play it.
Yeah.
It never occurs to me to just do it. Like, I don't know what it is.
So I mean, I definitely took a day over the Christmas break. It was like, cool, I'm going to spend a day playing through the rest of Deathloop, and I just like, it's got to the point where I was like, I'm just not, the amount of investment I need to make now to get these little minor story progressions, and then like hearing multiple people, having not looked up what it is, having multiple people say the story twist in this thing is fucking terrible. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, I will get to it. I want to see that thing through. I want to see how they implement like the final run. You know?
Yeah. I want to see what happens when you do the thing. Like, I want to see how that works. Like, it's But yeah, that's kind of all that. We like talking about music on this website. Mm-hmm. So, what was your big soundtrack moments from the year? Oh God. Well, Death's Door was a big one.
Yes.
That was good. There's just very really varied and like specific, like, but a lot of it is very much my like folk level mind of like there's a lot of like acoustic guitars and like flutes and stuff. It is amazingly well crafted soundtrack. It's by the same guy that did Titan Soul soundtrack. I can't actually remember his name right now.
I will look it up.
I will look it up and give him credit. But yeah, very, very, very good. David Fenn, that's his name. David Fenn. Cool. Excellent soundtrack. Really good music to kind of just have on in the background. It's like really good ambient music. Did that a lot. Deltarune Chapter 2. Didn't play it because I've not played like Deltarune or anything like that, but I watched the whole thing getting played, and yeah, that's just like more Toby Fox being good at his job.
Sure.
Like,
Yep.
makes really, really good music.
Toby Fox presents Deltarune Chapter 2. Yeah.
Yeah, like, if you get, like, to me, like, Deltarune and, like, Undertale and stuff like that is, like, here is Toby Fox making another album, and then there's also a video game attached to it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
That's it. It's just an excuse to be like, oh, sure, this guy gets to make more music, and then, yeah,
Excellent.
It's all great. Endwalker's got some really, really good songs in it.
I wondered if you just put it in there for that fucking rocks track you sent me that's in there.
Oh no! So the main theme is really good. Yeah, like the weird pop punk main theme that they've got. Yeah, it's really good. There was that power ballad that you sat and listened to while I was queuing for that one fight. The main cities have got really good theme. Like I sent you the night version of the Charlia theme. That's also very me. It's like very acoustic guitar ambient sort of thing. Very great. Razat Han has this. Razat Han's like supposed to be like India, Middle East sort of inspired thing, and it has this amazing theme song that is so fucking crazy. I need to let you listen to it, but it is great. Yeah, got some really, really good tunes. The last song in the Raid series is also really good. Guilty Gear Strive fucking is so brilliant. Like,
do you like Japanese power metal? Here you go.
Do you remember like really like mid 2000s wrestling and like also Japanese power songs? Because it's just that like together. It's just like songs that make it sound like buff dudes are fighting, but also really weird translated Japanese lyrics. Oh, it's brilliant. It's so good. Like I had a thing with people in my Final Fantasy guild where we were like, let's all make a tier list of the character themes in Guilty Gear Strive and then compare them, and we were all so wildly different that it was unbelievable. It was entirely just based on like what do you think is good. And
excellent.
The one that really stands out for a lot of people is May's theme, because that is like super bright, bubbly pop song about this girl that throws dolphins at you, and it's so counter to everything else that's on that soundtrack. Yeah, it was crazy. Strive's got some amazing tracks in there. The last one is Knockout City, like I talked about before.
Yeah,
like,
I need to listen to the soundtrack for this. I didn't pick up on that.
It's fucking crazy. It's like, what if we took some... It's like taking like the ideas of Hideki Naganuma and instead of twisting it to be more like electronic and punky, we lent more into the weird jazzy like side of it, and then brought in like some EDM, and it's unbelievable what that thing has as a soundtrack, and it's as good as it is. Like I played it so much and then listened to a lot of the it's brilliant. It is so cool, and it is like right in the sort of like stuff that I like listening to, where it is this like massive overlap of a bunch of different genres that I really like.
Yep.
It was just bizarre to sit and listen to.
That's
cool. This is some good highlights to it.
I really like the Act 1 music for Inscription as well. Like specifically, like
that was
the other ones didn't
ambient,
really
good
stand out as
stuff.
much, but like that one specifically was like, okay, yeah, there's some cool stuff in here, and like a lot of subtle like glitchy work happening in the back of that as well, which was really cool. Life is Strange did another great Life is Strange soundtrack, like a lot of really cool licensed stuff that I need to go find and see. Some people on Spotify doing the work of putting that playlist together already, which is excellent.
That's what they do.
Yeah, it's great. Road 96 has a really good soundtrack as well. Like, it's a varied soundtrack as well. Like, I was mainly there for Toxic Avenger because I just love that stuff. But like, a lot of the acoustic tracks are really good. There's a really good again, a lot of variety in there that's super cool. An Artful Escape, like, the music is a big part of that game, but also like a lot of the music in there is a style of music that I don't actively listen to, but they made it the presentation of it is so cool. And even the folk stuff that they are so adamant they're against is actually really good as well. Like, it's got
the opening cutscene where it's quite clearly what's his name? Francis's uncle, is it Johnny? Is that his name?
Yes.
Yeah. Is one of his tracks, and you're like, you get it, it's Bob Dylan, like you understand that that's what they're going for, but then it's still you hear it and you're like, oh no, it's actually they've actually written like a really good folk song,
yes.
like randomly.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll also say very quickly, I didn't write it in the list, but Guardians soundtrack is really good. It's got like all of the big 80s hits that you would expect, and it uses them in really interesting ways, like the huddle mechanic, where it's like,
I keep hearing about the huddle and it being very good. So
it's basically like, it's a little like dialogue mini game that if you do it successfully, like Star-Lord hits his Walkman and it plays a random 80s track from the thing while you're finishing the fight, and it's like, like finishing it to take on me was a really good moment from
does
the last
time. Does it have the touch on it?
Does it have the touch? I think it has the touch, yes.
Good. Better have the touch.
But also specifically like the new music that they've written for Star-Lord, the band that he got his name from.
Oh yeah,
is like so spot on in terms of like cultural underpinning, and also like it's just solid good shit. Like it there was definitely a couple of moments where you look it up and you're like, oh, that's not a period piece, that is something they've written for this game.
Written that. Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah, that was a great, super good thing. And yeah, just like some other like some just weird moments from the year, like Game Pass is excellent. It is a fantastic deal for what it is, and I've experienced a lot more games on there and it's easier to recommend games as well, where you're like, you've got Game Pass, like just try the first hour and see what you like. But two things that were not great about it for me was that, one, the Xbox app Microsoft Store experience is an absolute fucking travesty. Like, it feels illegal that it's that as bad as it is. Like,
downloading a Microsoft game on Windows is so fucking difficult.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So, I don't know how they keep getting away with it.
I can't remember if I talked about it in this podcast or not, but we were a bunch of us were playing The Ascent on Game Pass, and The Ascent, for people who are following it this year, was fucking broken at launch, like in terms of the multiplayer anyway. Excuse me. But the first patch was supposed to fix all the co-op problems we were having. Turns out the problems we were having was actually to do with one guy's machine setup and nothing to do with the game, but that's a whole other story.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So we were waiting on this patch, and I got the tweet came through that was like, hey, patch is now live on the Xbox Store. I'll also say the problem with there being like Game Pass and Steam now as the two big platforms that are there, like the difference in patch delivery times between the two is insane. Where like they will say, hey, our patch is going through cert for Steam, and like 24 hours later they'll say it's live. The Game Pass patch for The Ascent took a week and a half to get cleared through cert.
Jesus.
And it's insane. So we got the tweet that says, hey, the patch is out. We as soon as I saw that, I booted up the Xbox app, couldn't figure out how to trigger a patch, could not figure out what I needed to do to trigger a patch. I was like, okay,
which one of the 3 apps is it that you need to open?
So I booted up the game, and it booted the game up, and then the game was like, hey, you need to patch, and closed the game. And I was like, okay, tell me how to patch then. And then you Google around, and it's like, oh no, you need to open up the Microsoft Store app, which is a different app. Then go to your like library, and once you go to the library,
your My Apps bit.
Yeah, and then once you go into that, which also moved halfway through the year, which was fun.
Yeah. When they updated it and said it was better.
Yeah, they moved it. Yeah. So then you go into My Library, and it goes, hey, there's a patch to The Ascent. You should go back to the Xbox app to trigger this download. And I'm just like, this is a night. How does anyone do this?
I don't know how any of this gets cleared. Like,
we were playing. We'd start playing through Halo. No, not Halo. We'd start playing through Gears 5 as well, because that was on Game Pass. Hey, we'll play through Gears 5. And our first game worked fine. The second time we tried to get back into a session, we all booted up the game and was like, hey, your version doesn't match the server version. It's like, okay, so there's a patch. We know how to do patches now. Open up the Microsoft Store, and it was like, oh no, there's no patch for this game. I'm like, so what the fuck do we do? Turns out you go on Twitter and it's like, hey, there's like a 24-hour period where like they will update the client for the Game Pass version, where the server will update, but the client hasn't triggered that there's a patch yet, so you just can't play it for 24 hours. And you're like,
Yeah.
what? This is a Gears game! This is a Gears game on an Xbox app that doesn't work! Like, what the fuck is actually happening?
It's Gears of fucking War!
It was wild. And then, like, Halo fucked up for us, for me, at least. It was just such a bad experience. So then I was like, okay, I assume as well that they're like, hey, this will all get fixed by Windows 11, and then Windows 11 just broke. Like, so as somebody who's doing a bunch of music stuff, I was waiting for a bunch of music YouTubers and stuff that I follow to be like, hey, what's Windows 11 like for music software? Turns out it's broken all of it. Like, there's a guy, the guy I follow got upgraded his machine, had to get a pre-built because you can't purchase hardware in 2021 at all. So I had to get pre-built. Pre-built comes with Windows 11 and installed all his shit on it, and it was like, none of this fucking works. Like, none of it works. And it's like, so he had to wipe the whole pre-build, reinstall Windows 10 to get back to work to do his job. And it's just like, oh, it's such a nightmare. But yeah, the other part of the Game Pass thing that really got me as well is like, people had talked about this when Game Pass started becoming, when people started realizing Game Pass was actually really good value, is that like the traditional delineations we have for video games on price, where like, because we do it all the time on the podcast and stuff like that. You're like, hey, it's a cool game, and it's like a 15 quid game, so that should set some scope as to what this game is. Or like, hey, this is a full $60 game, so that should set some expectations as to what it is. So when Halo Infinite came out on Game Pass, and I started playing it, and I was like, I don't think this is very good. Or like, it's more Halo, which is a thing that like, if you like Halo, this is a Halo-ass video game.
This is the release that affirmed the fact that I think Halo's bad.
Yeah.
Like, so because like we played Reach and 1 together.
Yes.
And
I've played 2
Reach is the one that
well.
people say, and I'd also played like 2 at some point, but like, people keep saying that Reach is like one of the best ones and stuff like that. So we did that, and I played a bunch of Halo Infinite multiplayer. I don't get it.
Nope.
I just don't get it. I think that game is bad. Like, the shooting is bad. It is a bad shooter.
I did the single player stuff. I got to the quote unquote open world part of it, and it's like, do you remember when we talked about God, what was that game where we had this conversation where it was like, it feels like they've just ignored all of the other developments in this genre until this game came out. Like Gears is kind of one of it, which is like, it feels like 5 years ago they were like, hey, these Ubisoft games are cool, we should do one of them for Halo, or that's the direction we should take Halo, which is not a terrible decision, right?
Sure.
But then they basically sealed themselves off for the world for 5 years, and then came back and was like, hey, look, we made a Ubisoft game in Halo. And you're like, yeah, you made a 5-year-old Ubisoft. Like, Ubisoft games have got better
old video game
since then. And it's like, you cannot just have an open world with a bunch of icons on it that's like, here, take over this outpost. And it's like, literally like, here's an outpost, here's a tower, here's like a secret thing, here's a cosmetic. And it's just like, it's just not, and it doesn't look good. It's just not like, so all of this stuff stacked up where I was like, I played like 4 or 5 hours of that game and I was like, I'm good. Like, I'm just not into this.
Yeah.
But then I uninstalled it from Game Pass, and I was just like, because is that game available on Steam? I think that game's available on Steam, right? Is it full price?
Yeah. I think so, yeah.
Halo Infinite Steam, not Stream. Steam. Because Steam for $49.99. Yeah, the campaign is $49.99. Yep. So it's a full price, 50 quid game.
Yes.
The existential crisis this game gave me was that how many games have I gone through where, because it's a 60 quid game, I've persevered with a game I did not like, right?
Oh, right, okay.
Like, sure. How much of the investment of like, well, I paid for this thing, I should go through and I should finish it, right? I should see it all. Whereas when you get something like Halo Infinite, which is like theoretically a full price, real ass AAA video game.
Yeah. And
you're just like, this is not good, and just bombing out of it. But also, because that's now an option, especially if you're Microsoft and you control Game Pass, you now have the option to make games of indeterminate budget with different names and just put them on Game Pass, and you don't have the same level of like, what should I expect from this game? Like, it basically eliminates the entire like price conversation, right? Like, is this game worth 60 quid? Yes, no. Just goes away, right? If you've got Game Pass. So then you're looking at it going like, so what does this mean? Does this mean that like, yes, we can play more games, but like, I'm sure we had the conversation at some point about like, does Game Pass change how people design games, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Because you see a lot of games come out in Game Pass, like we played through, God, what was that game? Zombie Army, right? Was one of the games we got through Game Pass. It was like, yeah, this is a fun thing for us to fuck around with. But it's like, all that game is, all the cosmetics and DLC stuff for that game is all for pay and is not free on Game Pass. So you're like, are we going to see more AAA stuff, or like, I don't mean AAA in terms of quality, I mean AAA as in like Source Studios being like, yes, we're going to do like the chunk of it that is Game Pass and put a bunch more of it behind. We're now going back to the like, is the DLC on the disc question, right? Of like, are we doing like, here's the free part of the game, but if you want the rest of the game, you have to pay for it. Does it change how games are designed? Where it's like, Halo Infinite feels like a smaller budget game, but it's a Halo game on a Microsoft platform that says Halo, and you're just like, what does any of this mean? Like, our usual yardsticks are just now gone, and it's going to be interesting to see how the larger games navigate this world in which Game Pass exists, right? And is a thing. And theoretically, Sony, the rumors are Sony are doing their own thing that's kind of like Game Pass, and you're like, okay, how does this affect? Like, theoretically, from all of the conversations I've heard anyway, Game Pass is a good deal for developers. Like it like not in the same way as like the EGS leak from this year, which was like, here's the amount of money that Epic paid for various games they gave away for free.
That big spreadsheet.
Yeah, like you should go back and listen to the podcast episode we did on that. But like, EGS is not a good deal for developers. Like, the amount of money they get back as compared to sales is just not great. It sounds like, from what people are saying, Game Pass is a really good deal because it's where Microsoft are putting their money because they understand the retention possibilities of Game Pass. So like, if it gets more people to play more games of a smaller size because it's a good deal for developers to actually just go do that, that's great. But in terms of like your bigger games, how does that affect that stuff where you're like there's never going to be a Call of Duty on Game Pass, right? Because that game
needs to sell, but yeah,
that game needs to sell, and that game is physically designed to be a $60 thing that you buy once a year, like a sports game is, right? It's just going to be super interesting, and kind of it rejigged a bunch of expectations in my head for large games that are coming out in Game Pass, especially for Microsoft. It was a weird thing. Yeah. And then like the last thing as well, like just at New Year, we had the second big game dev saying, yeah, we're investigating NFTs, like, seriously.
Yep.
Where Squeenix have said, like, yeah, we're going to do some NFT games after Ubisoft doing their thing, which became what was it, their like most downvoted video ever or something like that.
Yeah,
and it's
their Ghost Recon thing that
and it's just like
ended up not going anywhere.
Yeah, like completely unnecessary, especially in video games where DLC cosmetics have been a thing for a while that we've kind of just normalized and been like, you either part of it, you're not, or you kind of understand it, or like you either interact with that system or you don't, and that's up to you, and that's fine.
Yeah.
We're now like, now they're NFTs. It's like, I mean, you don't need NFTs to be able to do the thing that you've been doing for 10 years at this point. Like, I saw a tweet today that was like, people need to stop comparing the NFT thing to the horse armor debacle from however long ago it was, because horse armor was
from the start of the early days of DLC.
Exactly, like the same things. Like, it is a different thing because, like, one, the model itself is different, where like, yeah, you can pay money and get horse armor, and like, it's dumb, but like, you can make that call yourself, and also horse armor doesn't destroy large parts of the Amazon every time you buy one, right? It's right. Like, there is a different conversation, and my worry is that developers are going to pitch it as it's like cooler cosmetic DLC, and it's like it's just not. Like, it is, but the architecture they put around it is just not.
Yeah, there's way more to it than just saying that.
Yeah, and it's just I hope. The thing that's getting me about a lot of the NFT stuff, but specifically the NFT stuff in games, is like there's been such a giant pushback from the community on it, but people are still doing it. Like,
yeah, of course. Yeah.
And it's like that should be the thing where people go, oh, it's like, okay, fine, we fucked up, we'll not do it. It's all right. Don't worry about it. They're still trying it, and every company is still
too much money in it to not.
But like, it's not right. It's
fake money, but like
it's fake money, and also it's this the NFT like get in early mentality appears to have just infected everyone who's in this kind of business, right? Where it's like, well, you need to get in now because the metaverse is coming and you'll need to be ready for this stuff. And it's like, one, no, you don't, and it's like none of it's just such a the staying power of NFTs is terrifying to me, honestly.
Yes.
Like, it's one of the like, you see a lot of these technologies come and go, and like startups will do this kind of shit, but like the fact that there's such unanimous among your normal people, such unanimous rejection of this idea, and people are still doing it is scary. But yeah, we'll see. And I mean, like, even the Kickstarter one was the big one for me. That was like, oh, this is not going away. Like, that was the moment where I was like, we're gonna have to live with this. Like, this is COVID and NFTs are gonna be around for a while.
Sadly.
Yeah, like Kickstarter going, hey, we're doing this thing. Their entire user base who provides all of their funds being like, we don't want this, we don't need this, please don't do this. And then them coming out and going, we think this is best for our community, despite the fact the community has said fuck you, is just
universally saying no.
Like, it's fucking wild. It really is.
I would add in, if we're talking about biggest fuck yous for gaming this year, like everything to do with Activision Blizzard.
Like that entire.
That's a giant fuck you. Like, that's
it was
so
massive,
much bad stuff.
But it was also like, it was also the year where, like, unfortunately, this is not the first year where we've had those kind of,
sadly,
that kind of thing has come to light. But this felt like the first year where, like, a lot of the companies have gone mask off and have been like, if we just don't talk about this, it will go away, right? It seems to have worked for Ubisoft. Like, if you're not actively following the industry, like, I bet you've probably forgotten a bunch of the Ubisoft stuff, right? Like, that happened earlier in the year that was like, this is fucking bad. I mean, specifically...
The only reason that the Activision Blizzard stuff is still there is because more stuff keeps getting found. Yeah. So it keeps coming up in the news cycle. If that happened with Ubisoft, you'd still be talking about it as well.
I mean, also because the Activision stuff is a, like, actual loss. Like, that has gone to courts, right? That is going to be
that as well.
Actually legislated that they need to do something about. Like, a state sued them, right? That is as opposed to the Ubisoft stuff, which was a lot of like, internal reports and journalism and investigative journalism and like a lot of this stuff. Like, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying that, like, there's a weight that comes behind, like, no, like, the legal process is happening now. That is going to mean that that's going to stay in the forefront. And, like, you see the extent of the Activision Blizzard stuff specifically, like everything from, like, the Cosby Room stuff from Blizzard right up to, like, Kotick was not only knew about all of this all the time, but also has his own allegations against him to deal with. Yeah. And you're like, that is...
And still gets to keep his job, and the board stand behind him.
Exactly. And, like, that's the real mask off moment for me, which is like, this company's going to still make money, and they're still going to put out Call of Duty, and they're still going to be fine. So, like, it is currently the graph of, like, how much it's going to cost us to get rid of Kotick, and how much money he's going to bring in doing his job.
Yeah, what's that equation?
That graph has not crossed over yet, and so he's going to stay. Like, there's zero like morality to any of this. It's literally this financial graph that is like, once that crosses over, he will be fucking gone immediately. But until it gets there, it's just not gonna happen. Like, and it's the thing about like, I don't know if you've been following the Theranos trial stuff, but like, that is actually, to me, kind of similar, right? Where like the Theranos trial is only happening because investors sued them, right? Like it's not about the people who got those fake blood tests, who got results that were wrong, that had health implications. Like none of that, none of the active people being harmed shit is the lawsuit. It's the investors and people with capital got fucked, so they're the ones that get sued, and that's how it ends up in court. Like it's going to be the same thing, right? The moment that like investors in Activision and stuff like that are like, hey, you need to not do this, like that's the moment where I think it's going to change, I think. But yeah, it's watching this thing spiral out into like every part of that company has just been,
it's been unreal. Like
it's been insane,
and it's all like going from like the allegations to like the union busting to like this all just sort of like unravels the more that it keeps going on, and it's all stuff that is just like
and like
the implication or the ripple effect that it has on the industry, I hope at any rate, is that like people actually start unionizing. Like that would be great. But
yeah, and again, like this was also the year that like Amazon got caught union busting as well when that
as well. Yeah. Same company, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. But like the idea that like they can do this out in the open and it's fine is just like they're not even trying to hide it anymore. Like you watch all the statements that Activision made and during this whole thing, and they're just like, it's the most like completely no morality, just not just, we're going to say the PR line because that's the PR line we're going to say, and like it doesn't actually matter what we say because it's not going to change any. It's just like just the openness of like the fuck you is just terrifying. Really, it is really kind of scary that like once you start seeing this stuff. But yeah, I think that was everything I had on here. So we'll leave with stuff that's happening soon, right? So I think February is the big month.
February's the month, yeah.
Yeah. Because that is Dying Light 2, theoretically.
Fucking who knows with that game like that.
Sifu.
Yes.
What was the other one? There was something else as well.
Witch Queen.
Witch Queen. Yeah, that's the other one. Yes.
Total War Warhammer 3 as well as February, which is really cool. And Elden Ring, if you care about that. But
the interesting thing to me about Elden Ring is it sounds like people have played chunks of that game, like press.
Yeah.
And like,
there was like an alpha that came out that was like 4 hours or 6 hours.
No, even on top of the network test. Like it sounds like people
really? Okay.
There's a bunch of...
Oh no, yeah, people have it like for review, don't they?
I don't know if they've got review copies, but they've definitely got like a chunk of that game.
Chunk of the game. Yeah.
That you can see them very carefully, like, there are specific things we can't say about this, but we really want to talk about it, and it's like we've played there's a Guild Wars 2 expansion apparently in February.
Yeah, and the Dragons. It was the one that almost made me go back and play more Guild Wars 2 because End of Dragons is set in Cantha, which is the realm that Factions was set in, and that's where I like really seriously started playing Guild Wars. There's a lot of like memory of Cantha for me.
Sure.
But I probably won't. There's too much Endwalker to play.
Yeah, there's a lot of Endwalker to play.
Endwalker and Witch Queen come February, so that's a lot of.
Fucking Horizon is that month. As well.
Forgotten West, yeah, Forbidden West,
18th as well. So. Yeah, but I mean, and again, like we kind of went through this last year as well, where there's going to be stuff throughout the year that we don't know exists that is going to become one of our best games of the year for sure. So I'm always interested.
Although I don't know, I already know Sifu's coming out, and that's
sure,
that's probably going to be high up there.
Windjammers 2 is January.
That's true. If I could trust the people that made Absolver to make a better one of that isn't weird like Absolver was, that can be like real high up there.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, so there's stuff. So we'll be playing some video games in 2022, and it feels like, and again, like I'm sure everyone has said this, but I will just say it again for reference. Like the knock-on effects of COVID are still going to be effective in 2022. Like stuff is going to get bumped, and it's going to, like, we are barely even starting to recover at this point in terms of, like, not just games, like, and just like, hey, you still can't buy a fucking new PC this year because we're still recovering from the production effects of COVID. So stuff's going to get bumped again, and we're going to lose some games along the way.
Yeah.
But my hope again is for, on a positive note, like, again, to briefly mention Guardians, like, Guardians was a really interesting thing this year as well, because that game got announced at E3, or shown, I mean, it was rumored to have happened, but, like, shown at E3 and then came out in October and has been pretty universally lauded. Like, that feels like the thing that we should be doing more of as an industry, right? Is like these short, like, announcement comes out style things, rather than not
they announce a game 3 years ahead.
Yeah, of like, we're not doing Starfield again, right? Like, God knows when Starfield even is a thing, right?
Or the fucking Elder Scrolls 6 is the big one. That game's not coming out until like 2026.
At least they were at least out the gate with Elder Scrolls 6, they were like, this is a name, we're working on it. Stop asking us.
Yes, we're making an Elder Scrolls game.
Right, like the least surprising thing ever. But like, I would like more things which is like, oh cool, this is a thing that I didn't know existed 24 hours ago. Oh, it's out in 4 months. Oh, sweet, okay.
Yeah.
More of that would be quite good, I think.
I think still my favourite thing that's been done has actually been Sifu, where they came out with the announcement that they're releasing the game earlier than they intended to.
Right. Yep.
Like, that's... I assume that was to get away from, like, Elden Ring and like Destiny and stuff like that. But it takes a certain amount of confidence as a developer to be able to go like, nah, I think we can afford 2 weeks. Like, we'll come back and like release it earlier.
And
like,
a certain size of developer as well, to be like, if you're
you're a size, you can't do that as a big developer.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, the interesting thing about 2022 is going to be like some of the industry stuff that I feel like has changed, right? Like, what is E3 this year, right? Again, we've got an interesting...
Oh God, who knows? Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, like, I don't know if you've been following the stuff about CES in January, but they're like, or this month, which is always like, CES always happens in January, but they're like, yep, we are still running CES this year in person in Vegas, except that Nvidia's not going to be there, Samsung's not going to be there, Sony's not going to be there. Like, all of the companies have pulled out. But they're still definitely running it.
They're still doing it. Yeah.
Samsung announced their TV lineup for this year today, like a week before CES even starts. So like, the ripple effects of people watching E3 not happen and the industry being fine might actually spread out more.
Realize that you don't need these big.
You do not need.
Dimensions.
You don't need this anymore.
I get that it's good for the people in the industry because they like getting together and networking and stuff. That's fair enough.
And that'll still happen. Like, E3 going back to being like an actual business thing might be a thing, which makes a lot of sense. But for us as consumers and critics, like, we just don't. E3 doesn't need to be the thing it was before, right? It just doesn't. You can still do an interesting show. And again, like, because of the E3 cycle every year, that is how you end up with this, we're announcing a game 3 years in advance, right? Because you need to hit your E3 date to announce your thing to get the biggest hit. Whereas now you can be like, I'll put a trailer out in March, which will get picked up, and then it'll come out in August and it'll be all right. And again, like, you look at the big games we've talked about, like our favorite games of the year, and you're like stuff that was early access for a couple of years and is now out. A game from a small studio, that's free on Game, like the type of stuff that is rising to the top in years like this. That is not big budget, is not E3 trailer stuff. It's like, it's cool. It's good that we've got that flexibility now, and especially with stuff like the wholesome game streams and the future games streams and all this kind of stuff. Like, groups are getting together going like, yo, enough of us have skills to cut 40-minute videos together, pulling together a bunch of cool games. Why don't we just do that more often? This is cool to see. It's we're gonna get some cool unexpected stuff this year, and I'm looking forward to it. Cool. We should wrap this up. Thank you for listening, watching, however you're consuming this, either on YouTube or via the podcast. We're doing stuff on the website all year, so GameEngineStart.com. Go check it out. Subscribe to whatever things are on there to keep track of us. I really hope we get to do something in person again soon. I really do.
It would be cool, yeah.
It really would. But again, like I have used Discord and Parsec more this year than I ever have to share games and stuff like that. So like,
yeah,
more co-op stuff we can do using those tools or whatever would be cool as well. So so we'll see. I don't know. I create over the Christmas break. I created a folder that says GameEngineStart Site V2. I have some things to check, but it's not going to go anywhere. But it'd be interesting to see now that we kind of know what we're doing. But yeah, that's us. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and we will see you on our regular podcast in 2022 soon. Goodbye.
Bye.